The sky above the New Mexican desert burned white the morning the world changed. At 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, a sun rose where no sun belonged. It bloomed in silence for a fraction of a second, then tore the desert apart with a force no human being had ever witnessed. Men standing 10 miles away felt heat against their faces as if they had opened the door of a furnace. One of them, a thin, sharp-eyed physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer, whispered words from the Bhagavad Gita that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But that moment did not begin in the desert. It began in fear. In December 1938, in a quiet laboratory in Berlin, two German chemists made a discovery that fractured the 20th century. When they split the atom of uranium, it released an unimaginable burst of energy. The implications traveled faster than any telegram. Across the Atlantic, scientists who had fled Nazi Germany understood something terrifying. If Adolf Hitler obtained such a weapon first, the world would fall into darkness. One of those scientists, Albert Einstein, was not a man easily frightened, yet in 1939 he signed a letter addressed to Franklin Roosevelt, warning that Germany might be developing an atomic bomb. The letter was brief, clinical, but its consequences would echo across continents. Roosevelt read it. He did not fully grasp the science, he did grasp the stakes. Within months, what would later be called the Manhattan Project began quietly taking shape. At first, it seemed absurd. Build a weapon using the fundamental structure of matter? Harness energy from the atom itself? It sounded like science fiction. Yet by 1942, as American factories roared to life and young men boarded ships bound for Europe and the Pacific, the United States committed itself to a secret race, a race not just against Germany, but against time. The project spread across America like a shadow map. In Oak Ridge, thousands of workers arrived at a place that did not officially exist. They were told only that their work would shorten the war. They separated uranium isotopes without being told what uranium was. In Hanford, reactors rose beside the Columbia River, churning out plutonium in sealed chambers. And in the high desert of Los Alamos, beneath vast skies and endless wind, the brightest scientific minds in America gathered under Oppenheimer's direction to design the most dangerous device ever conceived. They came from everywhere. Refugees, patriots, theoretical dreamers, practical engineers. Some were barely 30 years old. They lived in wooden barracks. They argued over blackboards. They played poker at night. Children rode bicycles along dusty roads while their parents calculated explosive yields that could erase cities. Security was relentless. Mail was censored. Conversations were monitored. No one spoke of their work outside laboratory walls. The American public knew nothing. Even Vice President Harry Truman knew nothing. By April 1945, the war in Europe was ending. Berlin was collapsing. Hitler was dead. Germany surrendered in May. But in the Pacific, the war against Japan raged on with ferocious intensity. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa had revealed something chilling. The Japanese military would fight to the last soldier. American planners estimated that an invasion of mainland Japan could cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, perhaps more. Then Roosevelt died unexpectedly on April 12, 1945. Vice President Harry S. Truman was summoned and sworn in. Only after taking office did he learn of the Manhattan Project. He was informed that the United States possessed, or soon would possess, a weapon unlike anything in history. He was told it could end the war. He was told it could also begin something far more dangerous. When the Trinity test succeeded in July, the balance of power shifted in an instant.
News of the successful detonation reached Truman while he attended the Potsdam Conference with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Stalin already knew. Soviet spies had infiltrated the Manhattan Project. Even before the first bomb fell, the Cold War had begun in secret. Back in the Pacific, the Japanese government hesitated despite the Allies' demand for unconditional surrender. Military hardliners believed invasion was preferable to humiliation. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay took off from Tinian Island. Inside its belly rested a uranium bomb nicknamed Little Boy. Its target? Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb detonated over 1,900 feet above the city. A blinding flash, a rising column of smoke shaped like something the world had never seen before. Within seconds, tens of thousands were dead. Buildings dissolved, shadows burned into concrete. Human history divided itself into before and after. 3 days later, a second bomb, Fat Man, exploded over Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15th. World War II ended. In the United States, celebrations erupted. Crowds filled Times Square. Soldiers returned home. Factories shifted to peacetime production. The bomb was hailed as the weapon that saved American lives. Yet inside Los Alamos, celebration felt hollow. Oppenheimer watched the cheering headlines and understood something most Americans did not yet grasp. The secret could not remain American forever. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its own atomic bomb. The arms race began. The United States responded not by stepping back, but by building something even more powerful, the hydrogen bomb. By 1952, when the first thermonuclear device was tested in the Pacific, it dwarfed the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Entire islands were vaporized. American school children practiced duck-and-cover drills. Families built fallout shelters. Suburban homes came with bomb shelter advertisements in magazines. The atomic age shaped everything: politics, science, culture, even architecture. The interstate highway system was justified partly as a national defense measure. NASA would later emerge from Cold War competition. The space race became another front in a technological war born in the desert of New Mexico. Presidents from Truman to Eisenhower to Kennedy grappled with the same terrifying question: how do you prevent a weapon powerful enough to end civilization from being used again? The closest answer nearly failed in October 1962. When American reconnaissance photographs revealed Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, the world held its breath. For 13 days during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States and the Soviet Union stood on the brink of nuclear war. Naval blockades, secret negotiations, military forces on hair-trigger alert. One miscalculation could have meant annihilation. But diplomacy prevailed. Barely. The Manhattan Project had begun as a desperate wartime gamble. It ended as the foundation of a global nuclear order that still defines geopolitics today. From desert laboratories to presidential war rooms, from devastated Japanese cities to Cold War standoffs, the atomic bomb reshaped America's identity. It cemented the United States as a superpower. It sparked moral debates that endure to this day. Was it necessary? Was it justified? Could it have been avoided? Historians still argue. Survivors still remember. And the desert where the first artificial sun rose still bears the scars. The story of the atomic bomb is not merely about destruction. It is about fear, ambition, genius, secrecy, power. It is about how a nation mobilized its brightest minds to win a war, and in doing so, permanently altered the fate of humanity. And this is only the beginning.
The cheering in American streets faded faster than the mushroom clouds. By late 1945, the war was over, but peace felt unstable, fragile, like glass resting on a fault line. In Washington, President Harry S. Truman sat behind the resolute desk and confronted a reality no leader in human history had faced before. The United States now possessed the power to destroy civilization. For a brief moment, America held a monopoly on atomic weapons, but intelligence briefings made one thing clear: it would not last. Across the Atlantic, the wartime alliance with the Soviet Union was already unraveling. At the Potsdam Conference, tension had simmered beneath polite diplomacy. Joseph Stalin had smiled thinly when Truman casually mentioned a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin's reaction appeared indifferent, but American intelligence later learned he had already ordered Soviet scientists to accelerate their own atomic program. The race had shifted. No longer America versus Nazi Germany. Now it was America versus the Soviet Union. And this time, both sides would possess the sun. Inside the former wartime laboratories of Los Alamos, scientists faced an uneasy choice. Some believed atomic weapons should be placed under international control. Others argued that American superiority must be maintained at all costs. Oppenheimer himself advocated restraint. He supported civilian oversight and international agreements, but in Washington, restraint was not the dominant mood. In 1946, Congress passed the Atomic Energy Act, transferring control of nuclear weapons from the military to the Civilian Atomic Energy Commission. It was an attempt at accountability, but secrecy remained absolute. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Soviet physicist Igor Kurchatov worked relentlessly under Stalin's watchful eye. Soviet spies had already delivered critical information from within the Manhattan Project. The Americans did not yet fully understand how deeply their program had been penetrated. Then, on August 29, 1949, the balance of power shattered. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb at a remote test site in Kazakhstan. When news reached Washington, shock rippled through the administration. The American monopoly had lasted only 4 years. Truman addressed the nation calmly, but behind the scenes panic brewed. If the Soviets had the atomic bomb, what if they built something bigger? Within months, debate erupted over a new weapon, the hydrogen bomb. Unlike the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which relied on nuclear fission, the hydrogen bomb would use fusion, the same process that powers the sun. Its potential yield would not be measured in thousands of tons of TNT, but in millions, megatons. Some scientists argued it was morally indefensible. Others insisted it was strategically unavoidable. In January 1950, Truman made his decision. The United States would proceed. On November 1, 1952, at a remote Pacific atoll named Enuitak Atoll, the first full-scale thermonuclear device, codenamed Ivy Mike, detonated. The explosion did not simply destroy a test structure, it vaporized an entire island. The fireball reached miles into the sky. The shock waves circled the Earth. The crater left behind was so vast that ocean water rushed in to fill it. It was over 500 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Humanity had crossed another threshold. Less than a year later, the Soviet Union tested its own hydrogen bomb. The arms race escalated beyond imagination. By the mid-1950s, nuclear weapons were no longer rare scientific marvels, they were stockpiled by the hundreds. Strategists developed a doctrine known as mutually assured destruction. The logic was chilling in its simplicity. If both sides possessed enough nuclear weapons to annihilate the other, neither would dare strike first. Peace through terror. American suburbs adapted.
Fallout shelters were advertised in magazines alongside refrigerators and automobiles. Schools practiced air raid drills and sirens wailed in cities during civil defense exercises. Children crouched beneath wooden desks, hands over their heads, rehearsing survival against the unimaginable. Hollywood reflected the anxiety. Science fiction films featured radiation-mutated monsters and alien invasions, metaphors for atomic fear. The bomb was no longer secret, it was cultural. Then came 1962. By that autumn, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union had sharpened under President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. American spy planes photographed Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. Nuclear missiles, armed and nearly operational. If launched, they could reach Washington, New York, or Chicago within minutes. Kennedy convened his closest advisors. Military leaders urged immediate airstrikes. Some advocated full invasion, but invasion could trigger nuclear retaliation. For 13 days during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world stood on the brink of catastrophe. American naval forces established a quarantine around Cuba. Soviet ships approached the blockade line. Submarines armed with nuclear torpedoes patrolled beneath the Atlantic waves. At one terrifying moment, a Soviet submarine captain, cut off from communication and under depth charge pressure, nearly authorized launch of a nuclear torpedo. Only the descent of one officer aboard prevented escalation. Few Americans knew how close they came to nuclear war. Back-channel negotiations eventually produced a compromise. The Soviets would remove missiles from Cuba. The United States would secretly remove missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended, but the lesson remained. One miscalculation could erase entire nations. In the decades that followed, nuclear weapons shaped every aspect of American foreign policy. Arms limitation treaties emerged. The Partial Test Ban Treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, later the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. Each agreement attempted to place guardrails on annihilation. Yet arsenals continued to grow. By the 1980s, both the United States and the Soviet Union possessed tens of thousands of nuclear warheads, enough to destroy the planet many times over. Then, in 1986, at a summit in Reykjavik, President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev came astonishingly close to agreeing on the elimination of all nuclear weapons. The talks ultimately failed, but they marked a turning point. Within a few years, the Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The Cold War ended, but the weapons remained. Today, the desert at Trinity is quiet. Tourists visit twice a year, walking across ground where sand once turned to glass. The place is ordinary in appearance, scrub brush, wind, endless sky. Yet beneath that silence lies the moment humanity proved it could unleash the power of the stars. The United States entered the atomic age in secrecy and emerged as a superpower defined by it. The bomb ended one world war and created a new kind of war that has never been fought directly, yet has shaped every generation since. From the laboratories of Los Alamos to the brink of nuclear annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis, America's atomic journey is not just a story of weapons. It is a story of responsibility, of moral struggle, of scientific genius colliding with political power. And the story is not over. Because even now, decades after the Cold War, thousands of nuclear warheads remain on alert across the globe. By the late 1950s, J. Robert Oppenheimer was no longer the celebrated hero of Los Alamos. Despite his central role in ending World War II, his warnings about the hydrogen bomb and the moral responsibility of scientists had drawn suspicion. In 1954, in a dramatic public hearing, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked. The government accused him of harboring communist sympathies. The man who had helped bring the atom under human control was now cast aside, a tragic symbol of the tension between science and politics. Yet he remained undeterred in spirit. He continued to speak, write, and teach. He urged future generations to consider the ethical weight of knowledge, to recognize that power without wisdom could destroy civilization. While Oppenheimer faced personal and political ruin, the atomic age marched on. Cities continued to build bomb shelters, schools drilled children in duck and cover, and American culture absorbed nuclear anxiety in every form: movies, literature, even fashion. The bomb was no longer just a weapon, it was a lens through which Americans saw their world, infinite potential and infinite peril intertwined. The Cold War tested that reality over decades. The Cuban Missile Crisis had been just one near miss. In the 1960s and 1970s, incidents like the 1961 Goldsboro B-52 crash, where a bomber accidentally came close to dropping 2 nuclear bombs over North Carolina, reminded the world that human error could undo all civilization in a single moment. Even in peacetime, the atomic shadow shaped global diplomacy. The arms race drove technology forward, funded space exploration, and fueled political theater. Every missile silo, every reconnaissance flight, every treaty negotiation carried the silent weight of potential annihilation. By the 1980s, a new generation grew up with the bomb as a normalized fear. President Ronald Reagan would speak of Star Wars missile defense systems. Activists marched in cities worldwide, demanding disarmament. Literature and film portrayed post-apocalyptic worlds, imagining the human cost of nuclear conflict. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the Cold War ended, but the atomic age did not. Thousands of warheads remained, spread across multiple countries. The United States still held a decisive, terrifying power, the ability to obliterate cities, ecosystems, and generations. The story of the atomic bomb is therefore not a tale that ends with fireworks or treaties. It is ongoing. Humanity learned, the hard way, that some discoveries change the world forever. Once unleashed, they cannot be unmade. Trinity Desert, New Mexico, remains silent, the scorched earth now a historical site. Yet if one listens carefully, there is a whisper in the wind, a warning, a reminder, a question. Could a civilization so brilliant also be wise enough to survive the power it commands? The atomic age is a mirror. It reflects human ambition, fear, ingenuity, and fallibility. It asks every generation the same question: how will we wield the tools we create? The atoms that once slept in desert sand now live in cities, in treaties, in the pockets of nations. They are both guardian and threat, proof of genius and cautionary tale. And for the United States, for humanity, the story continues, not in explosions, but in choices, in vigilance, in courage to confront the consequences of knowledge. The first fireball rose in 1945, and its echo still vibrates across the world. Humanity learned to create the sun, but it must also learn, every day, not to burn itself. Because the desert remembers, because history remembers, because we, at last, must remember.